I'm Terry Price with the Jepson School, and I'm here with Professor Daniel Lieberman from Harvard University, evolutionary biologist, who'll be speaking tonight in the Forum series on Is Exercise the Best Medicine? First thing I want to ask you about is what do you make of this recent fascination with eating and exercising like our ancestors?
Well, I mean, in a way, it's great. The Paleo diet and sort of the ancestral fitness movements are certainly getting a lot of popularity, and they have some benefits, right? They're getting people off, high-carb diets and getting people exercising. So all that's good. I wouldn't say that I'm a fan of the Paleo diet. I think there's some, as an evolutionary biologist, I think there's some serious concerns that I have about the Paleo diet because, in a way, it's almost in a simple way, a demonstration of how not to use evolutionary theory. Because the basic assumption behind the Paleo diet and some of these ancestral fitness movements is that if hunter-gatherers did it, or if our ancestors did it, it must be good for you. And I think one of the most important lessons to learn about evolution is that we didn't evolve necessarily to be healthy. And just because our ancestors did something doesn't mean it's good for us. And just because we do something today doesn't mean that's novel, doesn't mean it's bad for us. Life doesn't work that way. I mean, we evolved to essentially have as many offspring as possible under really challenging conditions. And so, yes, it's true that there are certain aspects of our evolutionary history that can help us figure out what's better for us and what's worse for us. But it's not a simple blueprint. And you still need to apply the tools of science critically. So, for example, the Paleo diet forbids legumes or milk products. Now, my ancestors evolved adaptations to digest milk. I don't see any reason why I shouldn't take advantage of that wonderful natural selection that occurred, a few thousand years ago. Legumes, I mean, I don't really think that peanuts and lentils and all those things are really all that bad for you. So there's a lot to be sort of a little bit concerned about in the Paleo diet.
I also want to ask you about what's the biggest misconception or misinterpretation of your views about barefoot running?
Oh my gosh. I think probably the biggest misconception is that if you take your shoes off, that all of a sudden you'll become a great runner. I've never actually said that, nor have I actually even believed that. I think you can learn a lot about running from studying barefoot running. And I actually enjoy it. It can be a lot of fun to run barefoot, but it's no panacea, and shoes aren't evil. It's complicated. I think what really matters about running is how you use your body and how what your running form is. And so you can run well in shoes and you can run terribly barefoot. It's a skill that we have to learn. And one of the advantages of being barefoot is that you have a sort of a natural coach. It hurts to run really badly when you're barefoot, although people still manage to do that nonetheless. So I think there's something you can learn from it. I think being barefoot can also strengthen your feet, and I think a strong foot is a healthy foot. But shoes can also have some benefits. They protect our feet, and what happens sometimes is that people throw away their shoes, or they go quickly to minimal shoes, and minimal shoes is not barefoot. A shoe is a shoe, whether it's minimal or not. And then what happens is that they run poorly, and now they no longer have the shoe to protect them. So they have the worst of both worlds, and they get hurt. So people have to be careful, have to be thoughtful. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And don't, again, fall into this trap that, if our ancestors evolved to run barefoot, we should be barefoot. It's not so simple.
Can you say a little bit about how your research has affected your exercise regime, and maybe a bit about how running has affected your research?
That's a great question. I mean, I have to say, I've always loved running, and I started running when I was in high school, not for a team, just because I just realized it sort of made me feel better. And I kind of kept it up throughout my whole life, but once I started studying running, I think I got this positive feedback loop going, and the more I studied running, the more I started wanting to run, and the more running I did, the more I kind of informed my research. Mm-hmm. And now it's kind of hard to know where one begins and the other ends. They're so intricately interwoven in my life. It's also had some other interesting effects on me. For example, I study now. My research is really about how the human body is the way it is in terms of physical activity, and I'm very passionate about the importance of physical activity and how we should take the stairs, for example, and never the elevator, unless you break your leg or something. I mean, there are reasons to use an elevator, but I'm constantly pushing people to take the stairs. But every time I walk into my building, my office is on the 5th floor of the Peabody Museum at Harvard. And every morning when I walk into that building, yes, I do want to take the elevator. I'm a normal human being just like everybody else. But the reason I don't, 9 times out of 10, is that I don't want to be called a hypocrite. So I would say that my research has added sort of extra, but I would say beneficial burden to me. It kind of forces me to take the stairs when sometimes I might cheat a little bit.
Have you learned things on a run or while running that then led you to a research project?
Oh,
constantly.
You know what I mean? Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking at how people run or thinking about how I'm running. And in fact, sometimes, so for example, we've been doing a project on arm carriage and how you use your arms when you run and why you bend your arms at 90 degrees and how it affects stabilization and cost. And often when I'm running in the morning, I like to try out different ways of holding my arms. In fact, the other day I was running through a park in Cambridge, and it was early in the morning, and some guy was walking his kid to school, and I heard him say as I passed them, because I was doing something really stupid with my arms, and I remember him saying, "Oh, that guy must be a terrible runner." So yeah, no, I'm always trying things out. I mean, we're an experiment, right? And it's fun to experiment.
What do you make of the fact that people can be very good runners with very different forms, very different styles?
Well, people say that, but I'm not sure if that's really true. I think that if you look at the world's best runners, there's actually not that much variation in their running form from at least the legs down. I think there's a lot of variation in into arm carriage. So there are certain runners I can just spot by how they hold their arms, or, certain head movements like Paula Radcliffe, could pick her out of 100 runners. If Paula Radcliffe were there, you'd be able to figure out because her little head bob. But for the most part, I think that there's actually, I think there's some certain classic forms of running, aspects of running as a skill that all great runners share. For example, having a high cadence and avoiding overstride, and the way they get their knees up and landing pretty flat. I think, and I think a lot of, even though you don't need to run that way to run just like jog, I think there's a lot we can learn by studying really good runners in terms of just average, everyday. I'm not a fast runner, but I'm always trying to work on my running form, and watching great runners, I think, is a really useful skill.
That's a little broader question. What's the one thing about evolutionary biology that you wish public health leaders knew or would pay attention to in order to maybe deal with diseases of civilization or whatever it is?
That's a tough question because it's hard to get it down to just one thing. But I would say that the most important, I think, public health fact that we need to know is that most of the diseases that we confront today in our society, most of the chronic non-infectious diseases, many forms of cancer, certainly heart disease, osteoporosis, diabetes, that these are recent diseases. These are diseases that didn't used to exist very commonly. They used to be less severe. And importantly, they didn't just, and it's not because people didn't live long. People actually did used to live a lot longer than we think they did. When hunter-gatherers and people in subsistence economies live to be old, they tend not to get these diseases. And I think we need to know that heart disease, hypertension, osteoporosis, type 2 diabetes, these are not inevitable consequences of aging. These are diseases caused by the way in which we live, and they're to a large extent avoidable or much more manageable than we think they are. We can have our cake and eat it too. Well, not literally, figuratively. And I think we need to know that. We need to know that. I mean, almost every medical student is taught that hypertension, it just occurs with age. As you get older, your blood pressure goes up. That's not true. It's true. It's common in our society, but it's not. It's actually doesn't have to be that way. And I think we need to know that.
Professor Lieberman, well, thank you very much for joining us and being with us this evening.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.